Part 2. The Storm in Jerusalem, the Passion and the Roman Trial, c. AD 33. Hello friends, let's start with Part 2 of The Storm in Jerusalem, the Passion and the Roman Trial. Stay tuned. The Deliberate Provocation, Palm Sunday. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem for Passover was not accidental. It was a deliberate, scripted, and highly political act designed to fulfill a messianic prophecy and force a reaction. Passover was the most volatile week of the year. It commemorated the Exodus, the ultimate liberation from slavery, and thousands of pilgrims swelled Jerusalem's population, creating an atmosphere ripe for revolt. Roman troops were always on high alert, with Procurator Pontius Pilate temporarily transferring his base of operations from Caesarea Maritima to the Antonia fortress in Jerusalem to maintain order. Jesus chose to enter the city riding a donkey, fulfilling the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9, which described the arrival of a peaceful, righteous king, in stark contrast to a military hero riding a war horse. However, the crowd's reaction turned the peaceful gesture into a revolutionary rally. They spread cloaks and palm branches on the ground and shouted, "Hosanna, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai," meaning, "Save us, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," and "Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David." This was treasonous language in a Roman-occupied city. At the very same time Jesus was entering from the east gate on a donkey, Pontius Pilate, the symbol of Rome's brutal power, would have been entering from the west gate with his cavalry and legionnaires, a display of overwhelming force designed to intimidate the pilgrims. The triumphal entry was, therefore, a direct, public, symbolic counter-procession to Roman authority. The temple cleansing, treason against the elite. The very next day, Jesus escalated the confrontation by attacking the economic heart of the Jewish establishment, the temple courtyard. The common area, the court of the Gentiles, had been taken over by money changers and vendors selling sacrificial animals. The Sadducees, the priestly aristocratic class, were responsible for temple operations. They controlled the treasury, regulated the currency, demanding Roman money be exchanged for temple currency, often at extortionate rates, and made immense profit from the sale of purified animals for sacrifice. This system was vital for the Sadducees' power and their political truce with Rome. They kept the peace and the rituals flowing. Rome let them keep the profits. When Jesus drove out the vendors and money changers, he declared, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." This was not just a protest against inflation, it was a fourfold attack. Economic attack, it threatened the Sadducees' wealth and temple finances. Theological attack, it asserted that the temple system itself was corrupt and excluded non-Jews. The den of robbers was in the only place Gentiles were allowed. Prophetic attack, it echoed the prophets, Jeremiah and Isaiah, who had condemned the temple establishment before its destruction. Treasonous attack, by halting the sacrificial rituals, even briefly, Jesus risked causing a riot, which was the one thing the Romans and the temple authorities could not tolerate. At this point, the temple elite, chief priest Caiaphas and the Sadducees, determined that Jesus had to be eliminated. Caiaphas famously stated, "It is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." This was a pragmatic calculation. Jesus was a threat to the stability they needed to maintain their own power and prevent a Roman crackdown that would destroy the entire temple, as happened in 70 CE. The betrayal and the arrest. The timing and method of the arrest were crucial. They needed to seize Jesus without inciting the crowds, who viewed him as a prophet. Judas Iscariot became the necessary tool.
Judas's motivation remains one of history's great puzzles. Was he simply greedy, or was he, like many, a disappointed revolutionary? Some historical analysis suggests Judas may have been trying to force Jesus' hand, to push him into a corner where he would be compelled to use his miraculous power to overthrow the Romans and become the military messiah everyone expected. If Judas thought Jesus was weak or hesitant, delivering him to the authorities might have been the ultimate test to trigger the rebellion. The arrest occurred at night in the Garden of Gethsemane. When Simon Peter drew a sword, a gesture of zealot-style resistance, Jesus commanded him to put it away. This act sealed his fate. He refused the path of violent political revolution, confirming to Judas and the Roman allied temple guards that he was indeed a nonviolent threat, but a threat nonetheless. The two trials, sedition and treason. The ensuing events involved two trials, demonstrating the complex jurisdictional mess of occupied Judea. The Sanhedrin trial, Jewish authority. Jesus was brought before the Jewish high court, mostly Sadducees and some Pharisees. The charge was blasphemy, specifically claiming divinity or equality with God. However, because the Romans had stripped the Sanhedrin of the right to execute a capital sentence, they quickly pivoted. They needed a charge that Pilate would recognize and act upon. The Pilate trial, Roman authority. The Jewish authorities presented Jesus to Pontius Pilate with a simple, potent charge, sedition or treason. They did not mention blasphemy, which Pilate cared nothing about. They claimed Jesus was a revolutionary. He is misleading our nation and forbidding us to pay taxes to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Pilate, a cynical Roman pragmatist with a reputation for extreme cruelty, Josephus records he had executed many Jews without fair trial, did not fear Jesus as a spiritual rival. He saw him as a low-level disturbance. His concern was public order. If he dismissed Jesus, the Jewish leaders would complain to Rome that Pilate was failing to uphold imperial law, endangering his career. Pilate's attempt to release the revolutionary Barabbas, whose name literally translates to the Son of the Father, and who was a stasis, a violent insurrectionist, was a cynical political maneuver. He presented the crowd with a choice between a clear, violent rebel and Jesus, the ambiguous King of the Jews. The crowd, guided by the temple elite, chose Barabbas. By doing so, they demonstrated their preference for a violent military solution over Jesus's radical, nonviolent social revolution. The mechanism of terror, crucifixion. The execution that followed was the quintessential Roman expression of imperial dominance. Crucifixion was reserved for slaves, foreign rebels, and traitors, maistas. It was designed not merely to kill, but to terrify. The purpose of the cross was threefold. Public humiliation. The victim was stripped naked, scourged, and forced to carry the crossbeam, patibulum, through the streets to the execution site, Golgotha, maximizing public exposure and degradation. Excruciating pain. Death was slow, resulting from asphyxiation as the body struggled to lift itself for breath. Political warning. By being raised high above the main road outside the city walls, the crucified body served as a stark, decaying billboard advertising the price of rebellion against Rome. The Jesus movement, like all other movements that challenged Rome, was now officially and brutally concluded. A public display of utter failure and humiliation, the crucifixion successfully delivered its message. The kingdom of God had been crushed by the empire of